He was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, a man worth billions. She was just a cleaner in his sprawling mansion, but when fate intertwined their lives, he risked everything for her. Alexander Sterling glided through the corridors of his mansion like a king in his dominion. The polished marble beneath his bespoke shoes reflected the soft light filtering through the panoramic windows, revealing the vast expanse of his meticulously manicured garden. The silence was broken only by the faint rustle of his silk robe and the occasional click of his footsteps. Every piece of art, every furnishing, every inch of that space screamed power and wealth. He was accustomed to it, to a life where every whim was anticipated, every problem solved by a legion of staff. In a distant corner, almost invisible, was Sarah Miller. Her simple, functional grey uniform contrasted sharply with the surrounding splendor. She ran a soft cloth over the surface of an ebony table, her movements efficient and almost imperceptible. The faint scent of cleaning product hung in the air, a dissonant note against the expensive cologne Sterling wore. Sarah was just one of many cogs in the well-oiled machine that was Alexander Sterling's life, an anonymous figure ensuring the luster never faded. She had never exchanged more than a formal greeting with her employer, her gaze always downcast, her focus on the task at hand. That day, however, the mansion's majestic silence was abruptly shattered. Little Lily, Sterling's 6-year-old niece, and a bundle of boundless energy, had been left in the care of a nanny while her parents attended a business meeting. Bored with her toys, Lily began to explore the main living room, her curious eyes fixed on a blue and white Ming vase and priceless piece resting on a marble pedestal. The nanny, distracted by an urgent phone call, didn't notice the girl's approach. Sarah, who was polishing a nearby bookshelf, heard the sound of hurried little footsteps. She looked up just in time to see Lily stretch out her small hand to touch the smooth surface of the vase. A slight bump, an almost imperceptible tremor in the pedestal, and the vase began to tilt precariously. A gasp of horror escaped the nanny, who finally noticed the scene. Time seemed to freeze. Alexander Sterling, who had just emerged from his study and was descending the grand staircase, saw everything. The vase, a symbol of centuries of history and millions of dollars, was falling. Lily, wide-eyed, was directly beneath it. Without hesitation, Sarah dropped her cloth. In a flash of movement, she lunged forward, arms outstretched. A dull thud echoed as she managed to intercept the vase before it hit the floor, cushioning its fall with her own body. The sound of porcelain striking her skin was followed by a muffled gasp. The vase was safe, but Sarah crumpled to her knees, clutching it to her chest. A thin red line began to emerge on her forearm, where the sharp edge of the porcelain had grazed her skin. Silence returned, heavier than before. Lily began to cry, startled. The nanny rushed to the child, but her eyes and Sterling's were fixed on Sarah. Sterling descended the remaining steps, his face a mask of shock. He expected to see panic, apologies, perhaps even an attempt to conceal the incident. Instead, Sarah, still on her knees, handed the intact vase to the nanny with trembling but steady hands. She then looked up at Sterling, her large, dark eyes meeting his for the first time without any trace of subservience. There was a mix of relief and contained pain in her gaze. "Are you all right?" Sterling's voice sounded harsher than he intended. He wasn't asking about the vase. Sarah nodded, pulling her sleeve to cover the scratch. "Yes, sir. The child, is she all right?" "She is," Sterling replied, his eyes fixed on her arm. "You're hurt." Sarah shook her head. "It's nothing." But the red stain on her grey uniform told a different story. He watched as she rose, picked up her cloth and returned to the bookshelf as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something fundamental had shifted. The image of that woman, throwing herself without a second thought to protect a child and an object that weren't hers, driven by a pure impulse of courage and responsibility, etched itself into Alexander Sterling's mind. That night, as the mansion's customary silence enveloped him, Sterling wasn't thinking of profits, stocks, or meetings. Instead, the vision of Sarah on her knees, the vase safe in her arms, and the blood on her uniform replayed in his mind. He had witnessed many acts of calculated bravery, of altruism with ulterior motives. But this was different. It was genuine. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander Sterling felt profoundly intrigued by someone who had nothing to offer but her own essence. Alexander Sterling's mind, accustomed to cold calculations and market strategies, was now strangely preoccupied, not with the next big deal or stock fluctuations, but with the persistent image of Sarah Miller. He saw her on her knees, the Ming vase clutched safely against her body, blood staining her grey uniform. It was a vision that refused to fade, a stark contrast to the sterile, predictable world he had built. In the days that followed, the mansion, once a mere backdrop to his existence, became a stage where Sterling sought her out. His footsteps through the corridors grew slower, his eyes more observant. He would spot her in different corners, always working, always silent and efficient. She moved with a discreet grace, a ghost in his own dominion. But now, to him, she was the only real thing. The scent of cleaning product, once a dissonant note, now heralded her presence, a subtle sign he, inexplicably, began to anticipate. Sterling tried to ignore the disturbance. He locked himself in his study, immersed himself in financial reports, participated in endless video calls. But between profit charts and market projections, Sarah's face would emerge. Her dark, steady eyes, the silent courage he had witnessed that day. He found himself asking his butler, Mr. Davies, trivial details about the cleaning staff, disguising the inquiry with a pretext about efficiency. Mr. Davies, a man of impeccable discretion, merely offered standardized answers, oblivious to the true interest behind his employer's facade. One afternoon, Sterling saw her in the conservatory, watering the rare orchids. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating her profile. She spoke softly to the plants, a gentle murmur he couldn't decipher, but which carried an unexpected sweetness. He watched her for a long moment, hidden behind a pillar, feeling a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It was a curiosity deeper than any business deal had ever stirred in him, an attraction to a simplicity and authenticity he rarely encountered. He needed to speak to her, not about the vase, not about the incident, but about something, anything. The opportunity arose when he found her in the library, organizing the books. The scent of old paper and leather filled the air. "Sarah," he said, his voice sounding louder than intended in the quiet room. She turned abruptly, her eyes wide with surprise. It was the first time he had addressed her so informally. She gave a hasty, almost imperceptible nod, her face flushing slightly. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" He approached, feeling an odd hesitation. I wanted to ask if your arm is better." She instinctively touched her forearm, a protective gesture. "Oh, yes, sir. It's almost healed." It was nothing serious. She tried to smile, but the tension was palpable. "Nothing," Sterling repeated, his voice softer now. "You threw yourself in front of a priceless vase and my niece. That's hardly nothing, and Sarah." She lowered her gaze, embarrassed by the unexpected praise. "It was my duty to ensure safety in the mansion, sir." "Your duty?" He shook his head. "It wasn't part of your responsibilities to risk yourself like that. It was an act of pure courage." He paused, searching for the right words. I'm grateful." Sarah looked up again, and this time Sterling saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't subservience, but a flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of confusion. She wasn't used to being seen, much less thanked by him. "Thank you, sir," she murmured, still unsure what to say. The silence stretched. Sterling perceived the distance that separated them, not just physical, but social. He was the billionaire, she the cleaner. That chasm was deep, but for an instant he felt an overwhelming urge to cross it. "If you need anything, anything at all, please tell me," he said. His voice imbued with a sincerity that surprised even himself. She nodded, still a little stunned. "Yes, sir. Excuse me." She gave another slight nod and moved away, returning to her task. But her movements were now a little less automatic, a little more conscious. Sterling watched her leave, his heart beating with an unusual rhythm. The conversation had been brief, awkward, but it had been a start. He had spoken to her, seen the surprise in her eyes. The intrigue had transformed into something more, something he could no longer ignore. The life he knew was beginning to unravel, not because of a financial crisis or a business rival, but because of a woman who refused to be invisible. He knew with a growing certainty that he needed to discover more about Sarah Miller, even if it meant dismantling the world he had built.